Hello and welcome to Mr. Hunter's screencast over the 1920s. I'm going to be talking about three important items: the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan, the Red Scare, and anti-Semitism. Okay, to start out, we must understand that there was rising political tensions in the U.S. And really this rise in political tension started with violence. Okay, most of the time it usually does. Think about today's kind of what people are scared about and kind of what's going on. That's usually sparked by violence, right? We think of terrorism. Well, this was also happening at the start of the 1920s. There was actually bombs being delivered to capitalists such as John D. Rockefeller and then other political figures in the United States. This was kind of a sign and a big warning sign of radicalism, which is really threatening public order. Radicalism favors extreme change, and extreme change was happening throughout the world in other countries, and governments were changing, revolutions were happening, that sort of thing. Most of this radicalism in the 1920s is going to be referred to the ideas of socialist, communist, and anarchist groups. So what we are going to focus on is communism. Okay, communism, you guys usually see this associated with communism, right? This is actually the sickle and hammer. Okay, communism was started by the working class. Okay, communism, if we go back here, this is going to call for public ownership of all the means of production. And all the people are going to share equally in the wealth. This was a revolution started in Russia by the working class people, so farmers, factory workers, that sort of thing. It's going to follow the teachings of Karl Marx, and it's ultimately going to result in a classless society. Okay, so here are some kind of pictures of the Russian Revolution that did happen and came to Russia at the time. Okay, I'm going to actually turn you guys to a video that I show in my Global Studies class that talks really well about communism and explains it a lot better. So a couple minutes will show part of this clip here. It's going to talk just about communism. Okay.
Two types. First type is communism.
Okay, to kind of explain this anyway, a command economy is going to be an economy that's heavily controlled by the government. There's two types, communism and socialism. It's going to talk just a little bit about socialism, but we're really going to focus on communism here.
Under communism, the government owns all of the factors of production and makes all the decisions on how resources within that nation will be used. Socialism could be thought of as a watered-down version of communism in many ways. Government controls the critical industries, but it does allow individual freedom, some individual right to own property, to start up small businesses that the government doesn't consider to be critical to the overall economy. So communism, how does it work? Well, we can think about this idea of an entrepreneur coming up with an idea, in our case, opening up a coffee shop, purchasing some land, getting a business up and running. Well, in communism, that wouldn't happen. Why? Government controls all of the factors of production, makes all the decisions about which industries are going to operate. So government would determine how the factors of production get utilized. So who gets capital? How does that capital get used to build certain industries? Government under communism owns all the resources and makes decisions that hopefully are going to benefit the most people within society. No individual ownership. It's about what's good for all of society, not necessarily what's good for the individual. So an example, suppose it's middle of winter and you've got a tree out in your backyard and you need firewood. So you go out back, decide to chop up the tree and have some firewood for your home. Under communism, that would be considered illegal. It's not your tree to chop down, it's the tree of the people. You just happen to be living in that house, which, by the way, also is owned by the people. Under communism, the government would determine how many farmers there needs to be, how many employees are needed to go work in a factory, who's going to be a teacher, everyone needs to go to school, so governments could oversee and provide all of that too. So government's controlling one of the factors of production called labor. What happens to the output once industry has made the products it needs to make? Once all the farmers have grown their food, the students have been educated, and so forth. Well, suppose the boxes on the screen are representative of the output of the economic system. Under communism, every member in society would be entitled to an equal share of what was produced within that economic system over the course of a year or a specific period of time. Everyone gets the same amount. The second example of a command economy is
Okay, so obviously learning a little bit about command economies. If you kind of understand the United States economy at all, you will know that people would be freaked out by this concept of the government owning everything and the government distributing all of the wealth, the government controlling schools, the government controlling all the businesses. That is going to scare people. It is the opposite of what America is about. And America is about really private ownership, people rising up, starting their own businesses, becoming successful. That is not communism. So obviously this is going to turn into something called the Red Scare. Okay, so there was American communists here, and this is actually a photo of kind of the Communist Party of America at the time. Communists are going to draw their inspiration from the Russian Revolution of 1917. During that time of unrest, a small group of communists called the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, had seized control of the country of Russia. The Bolsheviks hoped their success would spark communist revolutions in other countries. So, in the United States, people are going to be scared of revolutions starting. But, really, that did not happen. Lenin established the Comintern, which means Communist International, and the Comintern united radical groups throughout the world who accepted Lenin's views on the need for revolution to create a communist state. So this would be part of that here. Okay? Anarchists, we've learned a little bit about them before. We talked about Chicago Haymarket Square. They're going to oppose all systems of government. Okay? They're actually usually peaceful, even though that they weren't very peaceful in the Chicago Haymarket Square bombing of 1886. Okay, so combined, these kind of anarchists and this really group right here was less than 1% of the population. Not a very big population at all. Still, many Americans viewed them with suspicion and alarm. This post-war fear of radicals became known as the Red Scare. Red, obviously, is going to be known as kind of the flag, as you saw in this picture here, the Red Scare, and communism is always associated kind of with that color there. Okay, this is also going to be a depiction of maybe the Red Scare. People are afraid of that, that kind of hammer and sickle coming across America with the anarchy, Bolshevism, and the Reds coming in and infiltrating the United States. All right, so the intensity of the Red Scare is actually going to increase at the turn of 1919. Okay, so on June 2nd, 1919, there was 8 bombs that exploded in 8 cities at the same time. One target was Attorney General Mitchell Palmer's house in Washington, D.C. In response, Palmer launched a campaign against subversives, or people who sought to overthrow the government. Palmer and his assistant, J. Edgar Hoover, conducted raids on homes, businesses, and meeting places of people they thought to be subversives. These Palmer raids sought weapons, explosives, and other evidence of violent activity. Officials entered buildings without warrants and seized records without permission. With little or no cause, they arrested 6,000 suspected radicals. Foreign-born suspects were deported, many without a court hearing. The only evidence of violent activity found was 3 pistols. Okay, so we are going to start raiding these houses of people we think are associated with communism and the Red Scare. This was a very, very small group of people, but the United States was scared of them. Alright, the next group we're going to learn about is the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan. I know we've talked about them before, but they really started their revival in kind of the early 1920s, and this started with the major anti-immigrant feelings of this time. The Klan was reborn in Atlantic, Georgia in 1950 after the lynching of Leo Frank, a Jewish factory manager. Frank had been condemned to death for killing a young girl named Mary Pagan. Convinced that Frank was innocent, the governor of Georgia reduced Frank's sentence to life imprisonment. At that point, armed men calling themselves the Knights of Mary Pagan broke Frank out of jail and hanged him. The Knights then reformed themselves as the new Invisible Order of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so you guys have heard of the Ku Klux Klan before. The revived Ku Klux Klan portrayed itself as the defender of American values. It restricted membership to native-born white Protestants and set itself against African Americans, immigrants, Catholics, and Jews. It also targeted prohibition violators during the 1920s. The Klan is intolerant, bragged its imperial wizard, Hiram Wesley Evans, of the people who are trying to destroy our traditional Americanism. Aliens who are constantly trying to change our civilization to do something that will suit themselves better. Okay, that was from a Klan member. In the early 1920s, the Klan swelled to between 3 and 4 million members and gained considerable political power throughout the country. Lawmakers supported the Klan, won control of state legislators in Oregon, Oklahoma, Texas, and Indiana. This was not just the South. And I think that's really important to understand. This was throughout the United States at this time. We have it in the West, we have it in the North, we have it in the South, we have it in the East. Okay, and the Klan actually won state legislatures in some states. At least control of them. Okay, so to demonstrate their power, as you can see in this picture, Klan members held massive marches in Washington, D.C., and other major cities. Yet, the Klan's violence and intimidation did remain secretive. They often struck at night wearing hoods that concealed their faces, using whippings, kidnappings, cross burnings, arson, and murder to terrorize their communities. Alright, the next topic of discussion is anti-Semitism. This is probably a word you guys have heard before, but maybe you don't understand fully. So, to kind of start this out, there was an influx of 2.4 million Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe that really stirred up what is called anti-Semitism. And as you can see on the screen, anti-Semitism is going to be this prejudice against Jews. Really, in some communities, this is going to spread to the United States. Okay, this is something that did not start in the 1920s. This is going to start really throughout a lot of history. And it's super important to understand that this idea did not come from Hitler. It did not come even in the 20th century. This goes back to the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, and this is just built upon really prejudices throughout history. So this kind of idea moved to America. Jews, really, they were prejudiced. They held prejudice in a lot of different aspects. There are some examples on the screen. Landlords refused to rent them apartments. Colleges limited the number of Jewish students that was admitted to the school. And then job ads said Christians only. Okay, there was actual kind of newspaper articles and magazine articles written about them. This one is by Henry Ford. It's called The International Jew, the World's Problem. And really, Jews were blamed and became scapegoats for many things. One of them, economic problems. They were also seen as really a threat to a capitalist society. This is kind of the Red Scare, right? We learned about the Red Scare. Well, people thought that they were going to come in and kind of ruin America's capitalism that they had and that private ownership of businesses. They were also blamed for really undermining the morals of our nation. Morality is one thing that's going to be discussed a lot in the 1920s. And ultimately, many people held them responsible for World War I. They said that they were able to pit leaders against each other, and they sparked a world war. So this feeling of anti-Semitism not just limited to Germany, but it also was moved to America at the time. And that's super important to understand when learning about the 20s.